Welcome to The Plain Truth, the show where we go into some of the mysteries, anomalies, and the dirty underbelly of the world around us. I'm your host, Paul, and joining us this week, we have Jim Willie, who's the editor of the Hat Trick Letter, which is found on goldenjackass.com. Jim, are you there?
I'm here.
Good. Well, thanks for coming. We appreciate it. Been a while, and so welcome. There's so much going on. Where to begin? I thought I'd start by saying, maybe I'm getting old, but it just seems to me like everything is going so quickly nowadays, everywhere on the planet, really. Do you get that feeling that things are picking up, the pace? It's kind of like we're building to a crescendo or something?
I do very much. I think there are some big developments in progress, and it's hard to put a finger on all of it. And I try to avoid the political infighting and, like issues of should Hillary be arrested. I try to focus on the geopolitical issues. And here are some of my thoughts of what you called in your message to me, the general quickening of all global events. I think there's a global paradigm shift in progress. And it's basically power moving from west to east. It's being pushed by insolvency in the West of the economies and the sovereign, debt situation. And it's being advanced by infrastructure development and basic investment across the board in the East. So if you will, Asia is taking the mantle of global power and global leadership. Notice, for instance, that when there's a squabble of importance, that it's Russia or China that seems to settle things, and it's the United States that is the incendiary element behind it, not the diplomatic element. We have numerous sovereign bonds that are in deep, deep trouble in the West. They're being supported by the liquidity of quantitative easing, otherwise known as hyper-monetary inflation from the central banks. Okay, at the same time, you have pretty much the dismantling and retirement of the petrodollar. This is enormous. The dollar cannot sustain itself because its underpinning with the de facto petrodollar standard is just shattering away. It's crumbling away. You have the rise of the Eurasian trade zone with numerous non-dollar platforms. You have things like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, coming into form. And a very big Western ally, namely Great Britain, is part of it. That angered the Obama administration a couple of years ago. The West and the East are having a battle that has gone so far as to include Patriarch Kirill, Russian Orthodox, visiting Pope Francis, the fascist Roman Catholic Pope, to confront the fascist Pope on their ingrained Satanism in the Vatican and their ingrained Satanism in the Western government leadership and their ingrained Satanism in the Western central banks. It was a monumental event about 4 years ago. Patriarch Kirill and Pope Francis. They talked about a number of things and apparently settled some things, made some agreements, but very little follow through on the Western side. There is a great quickening taking place. And if I had to point to the three biggest elements of it, it would be the crumbling petrodollar and the loss of the Saudi ally. It's a slow process. It would be the banking system insolvency and failure supported by intensive care, central bank hypermonetary inflation. They call it stimulus. and the development of the Eurasian trade zone, which I think has a main channel in the One Belt, One Road. I regard that as a table, a conference table of projects to further the Eurasian trade zone. Okay, so bank system failure, petrodollar dissolution, and rise of the Eurasian trade zone. These are the main quickening elements. And we're not done with them. They're in progress. They're going to be going on for a while, Paul. And I think they're going to result in some magnificent changes. And one of the biggest changes that will come eventually will be a combination of a few things that include more usage of gold in trade and banking, and also, how shall I say, China pushing the United States aside in taking control of the global currency, hard to know what to call it, system, network. But I think we're going to soon see an international dollar. And I don't know when. You know, I'd like to take a quick opportunity. YouTube seems to permit plagiarism of a number of my past transmissions and recorded interviews. I remember about a year ago, I said, you know, don't be surprised if in the next few years we see 10,000 gold and 400 silver. And now there's a YouTube transmission and file out there, a video file, that quotes me as saying that by the end of 2017. I never said that. I never said that. So the misquoting permitted within plagiarized YouTube is turning into an abomination. I just want to get on record saying that. And I'm going to be saying that with the early parts of almost all my interviews in the future. This interview is dated November 15th. So in several months, if this interview shows up with altered headlines and altered statements, and we're dealing with March or April or June of next year, just remember, this is November 15th and we're recording.
Well, Jim, I think YouTube has been kind of, I don't know if the word is decline. You know what I mean? It's been less and less useful, I suppose I would say. Kicking lots of interesting channels off the air or suspending them for some length of time. And then, as you said, permitting things that they know what they're allowing. They know what they are, and they just allow them. But anyway, okay, but back to the topic at hand. This quickening, I think I see another element in there. I'm not sure. Maybe it's implied in what you're saying. But I think basically American military power is not nearly as good as it was at one time. And I think that's visible to all.
I think it's visible to the smartest people who are out there and the ones who are paying attention. But people like my brother and father and several friends, not even close do they recognize that. They still make comments about, well, the U.S. military is the most powerful in the world. And I say, well, do you know what the Sunburn missile is? And they say, no. I said, then you shouldn't make statements like that.
Well, there's another statement for them you could make, and that is compare the F-35 to what it, we had 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, for 1/20th of the price, we could get a better plane that we used to build. Something's gone wrong, And
well,
I think
everything's gone wrong with military procurement and development. There's no concern on quality. There's only concern on bomb carrying capacity and whiz-bang features that may not work, but that's okay. We'll force our allies to buy them. I mean, it's becoming ridiculous. You're right. But U.S. military power is fading. And, no better evidence of that than the, I don't know whether to call it a loss or imminent loss or apparent loss in Syria. You can point to about 3 or 4 incidents where U.S. naval vessels have been isolated and basically shackled, incapacitated during MiG flyovers or Su flyovers from the Russian Air Force. The jamming mechanisms now that the Russian military has to render incapacitated the Aegis radar and targeting system is now well known by military experts. Well known, but not in the New York Times. So therefore my brother doesn't know about it. I call my brother lazy. I said, John, you're smart, but you're lazy. What do you mean? So well, you read the New York Times. Why? Because it's easy? He said, well, it is convenient. You know, they're reputable. I said, they used to be. Are you aware of the lies? Are you aware of the wrong statements? Are you aware of their support of Hillary? And he said, well, I don't know about that. You know, okay, this is where you go. There are a lot of people out there educated in the United States who don't know what's going on. So they don't know about the fading power of the U.S. military. I've got a very intriguing comment that came a month ago from a client, a paying client to the Hat-Trick Letter, who lives in Germany. His hometown is Ramstein. Oh. His father is in the U.S. military. Mm-hmm. And his father told him, and he passed it to me, his father told him, without the heroin trade going through the NATO bases and the main link in Ramstein, Germany, the U.S. Air Force would not have money for parts.
Well, okay. Then I guess I would say there's another possibility here, and that is the U.S. military bases in various places might end up being shuttered in a fairly quick period of time. Not necessarily like next year, but when it does happen, I mean, you could see within a year or two just a great retrenchment. What do you think?
I think we're going to see a change in the nature of U.S. military facilities. Mm-hmm. I think we're likely to see some shutdown. Mm-hmm. I think we're likely to see some have a transition mm-hmm. where they're just heroin distribution centers.
Well, we've privatized everything else. Why can't we privatize the Air Force? Right? It's a delivery service for all your heroin needs. By the way, kind of this might go into something. So there's this grand fight going on at the top. There are different countries, but also even within the U.S. or the Western world. And obviously there seems, I think you could, how shall we say it? The Air America side of delivering things is one of those. How do you see the factions fighting? I mean, who do you think is fighting whom? Is it what's factions? Going on?
U.S. government political factions?
Well, they're not even really U.S. Like I wouldn't call the CIA even a U.S. thing. You know what I mean? There's like the drug cartel within the intelligence networks. There's the banking. Like, for example, with Trump, I mean, we see all this fury, I guess you would say, and what does it signify? Are we looking at, the old boys with their drug and bankster fraud, afraid of losing it? Or would you read what's going on with all this top-level fighting, essentially, it seems like?
Okay, so you're referring to Western power structure.
Western, but then I think some of it is allied with other branches. I mean, it's not, I don't think any government only has one faction, but let's just start with Western factions.
Okay, let me have a preface to finish off the NATO topic. I didn't get a final comment there. Let me squeeze one in. When the U.S. had its failed Turkish coup to remove President Erdogan, we basically lost Turkey. In a matter of time, step by step, Russia is going to occupy, rent, and use the Incirlik NATO air base. That base is basically no longer NATO anymore. And I inquired with my best sources what happened to the heroin movement, because Turkey was the #1 distribution link to the rest of Europe for U.S. agency heroin. And I heard that all the heroin now is going directly to Italy and Germany. Okay. All right. I'm done with that topic. It's a nasty topic. And, Kosovo is the first stop. All right. To the factions. This is very complex. And let me start off by saying that the Western central bank cabal, the central bank franchise system run by the Rothschilds, they're on the defensive. And I don't mean in a small way. I have pretty good information that numerous elements in their middle level have quit because they were threatened with stripped wealth or being murdered. Murder has become a two-way street in the last 10 years. That's a very big statement to make. I don't want to mention who's doing the killing, who's doing the threatening for kills. But just one little, for instance, a few of the London bankers who were killed in sloppy style were done by the Russians. They had Russian investments and they went bad, so the punishment was they got killed, and Russians very rarely care about keeping it neat. If you have a neat murder of a London banker, it's usually done by either the Mossad or the Vatican. They do very clean work. They also make it look like there's plausible deniability of even a kill. That's how clean they are. They're professional. Russians aren't that way at all. I mean, when they want to, they can, but they don't care usually. They'll cut a guy's head off. They don't care. Okay, so the middle level Rothschild clan is on the defensive. And I will not say that they've lost their power. I'm just saying they've lost some of their players. They've lost some of their power. They're still involved. The entire Ukraine war is their little baby. They support the central banks. They support the military contractors. And I believe they support the ongoing Rockefeller initiatives with Monsanto, with GMO foods and poisons like glyphosate. Glyphosate was, they bribed somebody in the FDA to call that an antibiotic. So it appears in vaccines. It's a poison. The Rockefeller ongoing project also includes big pharma with laced vaccines. Right now in California, there's a huge epidemic. I don't want to call it up. There's a big outbreak in, I think it's mumps. Okay, so they're including the live virus in the vaccines, and some of the areas are having forced vaccination. All right, okay, so one element is the Rothschild central bank cabal faction, and I don't think they're weakened more than 50%, but they're weakened. They're nowhere near what they used to be in power, exclusive power, global power. If I had to sum up what Trump's support factions are, I would say it's the finance sector of Wall Street and the Pentagon. It gets complex because I think there are shades of good in the Wall Street support. Obviously, they're not going to throw Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan to the wolves, and obviously they're not going to expose the Bank of America and Citigroup narcotics with the Bush family. But I think they might be trying hard, even though they're led by Goldman Sachs in the Trump administration. I think they're trying hard to work toward some kind of a new platform for the dollar. And they're hamstrung. They can't do much. And the two biggest reasons they can't do much is the U.S. has lost a good, large, significant portion of its industrial base. And the evidence manifested is the 550, or is it 600 billion in trade deficit. To put that into perspective, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is approximately 7 billion in value at a napkin calculation of $50 per barrel of oil. So the U.S. trade deficit of 550 amounts to over 70, like 80 strategic petroleum reserves per year, every year. Let's switch references. Let's look at gold. The $550 billion is approximately 13,000 tons of gold. Figuring just a flat, $12.50 price, whatever. Okay, it's in the range, okay? These are not exact numbers. So 80 strategic petroleum reserves or 13,000 tons of gold, which is over 50% more than what Fort Knox held before it was pilfered by Clinton, Bush, and Rubin. So we cannot have an asset-backed currency for the new dollar. We would lose 13,000 tons a year. We cannot put up the tonnage of gold to support the dollar because we'd lose it as soon as we put it up. Therefore, we must start at ground zero, which is 20 to 30 to 40,000 new businesses a year in the United States with an emphasis to export a third of their output. That was one of the campaign promises of Trump. Totally abandoned, and we're almost 1 year into his first term. No progress whatsoever. Maybe he tried to court the Asians, the Japanese in particular, Chinese also, to foot the bill for reindustrializing the United States. But, you can't do that while you're engaged in an active trade war with China. So you got to stop the whole warmonger theme, whether it's hot military or trade, in order to fix the U.S. financial situation. All right, the other faction behind Trump is the Pentagon. Now, notice that not 2 months into the Trump administration, he backed out of a campaign promise to reduce the Pentagon budget, and he announced a $150 billion increase to the Pentagon budget. I knew right away he had been compromised. And by appointing 3 or 4 key Goldman Sachs people to his cabinet, I knew again he had been compromised. I knew who's running his administration, Goldman Sachs and the Pentagon. Okay, then we heard a lot of stories that the Pentagon was responsible for avoiding the vote fraud that would have allowed Hillary to win the election, even though she would have lost by 40% in a legitimate vote. 40, that's as in 10, 20, 30, 40% would have been the margin of victory for Trump. But the Pentagon interrupted a good deal of the fraud and assured a Trump victory on condition that the Pentagon run a good deal of his administration. And you've got, 3 generals, 4 generals in his cabinet? It's unprecedented. Okay, so we still love endless war, and we still love Wall Street bond fraud. But we might be moving away from the emphasis toward war and fraud, and it's really not clear. I think go ahead.
Well, this would be optimistic, but what I was hoping for, what you could argue, was that the two factions were the sane and the insane. And the sane wanted to negotiate basically things like drawing down the U.S. military and basically cutting deals with Russia and China, and really the whole world for that matter, but giving up on the idea of just using brute force for everything, which is not just military. I mean, brute force in the sense of, we'll cut you off from the SWIFT system or things like that. And then the insane seem more clearly found in, let's say, some of the people around Hillary who just practically promised crazy stuff like a no-fly zone in Syria, right?
Or nuclear war. Their best
oh, yeah, why not? Why not? Let's go for it. If we're going to be insane, why not?
No, there is active analysis and movement toward quick first strike against Russia nuclear. We think we can win this. Okay, there's that attitude in the fascist neocons, the Hillary and Democrat camp. That's part of the insane that you're describing.
That's why I use the term sane and insane. I mean, it's really that bad. The sane can still be evil, right? I mean, Goldman Sachs or whoever, but insane is literally we'll just try to use brute force and hopefully everybody will back down or something. Because actually, personally, I don't think Russia would. I don't think we can, and I don't even think China's backing down. So. But then I guess a related question would be, who do you think Trump, how do you see Trump? Do you think he sincerely wanted to do what he was saying? Is he just pressured, or is he an actor? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I think he had some decent intentions and decent plans. I remember during the campaign, he was very anti-military, and then he kind of switched. Okay, when he switched, I realized, okay, they got to him. He also was very much anti-banker. It was us versus them, the bankers versus the people, and he switched on that too. So I realized during the campaign, in the middle of the campaign, they got to him again. But once I saw the makeup of the cabinet with Goldman Sachs people and generals from the Pentagon, I realized who is behind not so much the Trump brain trust as much as the Trump mechanics for running things. Whoever was responsible for the victory got to run things, and Trump had to change his tune. So how do I see Trump? I see him as a man with good intentions, but who could not get things done the way he wanted to, because he had to compromise to win the victory and the White House. And it's much of the same old, unfortunately, broken pieces that are running things. I mean, you can make an argument that the Pentagon has a lot of white hats, and I think they do. But I think most of the white hats are retired generals and admirals who are part of the America First movement. I found it intriguing that the Trump inauguration speech mentioned the term America First, something like 20 times? Mm-hmm. Well, it's not let's put America first. He was citing the group of fired retired generals from the Pentagon, from the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, and the Obama administration for 24 years. 500 forced retirements in generals and admirals. That's the name of their movement. They want to take back America and restore its integrity, and to quit the endless wars, and to quit the bond fraud, and to have a substantial, realistic, industrial and financial footing. That's regarded as treason now. So they were fired.
Well, as I said, sane and insane.
Sane and insane. I don't disagree, Paul, but I'm just trying to put more color on the facade that you create. It's a legitimate facade. It's true. I think Trump is hamstrung. He's got a statement. Oh gosh, we have to mention at least on the surface this Vietnam summit with Chinese Xi and Russian Putin. Something big is going on, and I don't know exactly what it is. We got bits and pieces, we have hints and whatever, whispers, And it seems to me that Russia and China have informed the United States in Vietnam that there will be some significant changes. This is my take, okay? Informed the United States that there are going to be significant changes starting in early 2018 with respect to dominant usage of the dollar with respect to trade and banking. That's my opinion.
Okay, well then I guess,
huh?
so, okay, then what do you see, what might we be talking about? Are we talking about the Saudis? Are we talking about a competitor to the current, world bond system? What are we talking about?
Well, I think it's going to show itself in in many respects. I think it's going to open the door and give Saudi Arabia permission to sell oil in both the dollar and in RMB. And the United States will be put on notice, don't stop this. And I don't think they will be able to anyway, but look for the United States reaction to be terror and assassination inside Saudi Arabia.
That may happen no matter what.
This is what we do. Paul, this is what we do. We did it in Brazil. We killed Campos, who was a not so favorable presidential candidate toward the United States. We killed him. We even alerted one of his, not colleagues, but sort of rivals, a woman, don't get on that plane. So she got off the plane the last minute. Now she's a presidential rival, pro-U.S. Okay, there are lots of examples. We engage in terror and assassination, not just sanction. Sanction's kind of mild compared to murdering some leaders. Okay, what I think is coming as a follow-on to the Vietnam summit is a dual universe. Mm-hmm. And I think the United States is going to be told, you must tolerate the development of the RMB. There's going to be some joint efforts with the Chinese RMB currency and the Russian ruble currency. Don't interfere with it. Let it run. It's going to run in the Eurasian trade zone. They call it the Eurasian Economic Union. We don't need another EEUU. Come on. The United States and European Union are both EU. So it gets very confusing when you're reading initials, in placards. But the U.S. is going to be told, I think told. It's hard to say ordered, but they're going to be told, don't stop this unless you want some real big problems. The United States is going to be told, get the hell out of the Chinese, Japanese straits. Get out. It's not your part of the world. Get out. You're not Asian. Get out and stay out. So Indonesia, China, Japan, they're going to have flow that will basically support the Eurasian trade zone. Very key elements will be, as you pointed out in your notes, Japan and Costa Rica. Japan and South Korea. Sorry about that. Oh, boy. So Costa Rica is not going to figure in global matters too significantly. No, Japan is working right now with Russia on LNG pipelines and facilities for Sakhalin Bay Russian production. The United States is going to be told, don't get in the way of Japanese energy development. South Korea is a totally different ball of wax. I don't have any firm opinions about South Korea, except they're in a big rivalry with China. They don't like each other. There's a lot of friction. There's a lot of callback of tourists. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. And I don't even want to touch North Korea. Sorry, I'm just not going to touch it at all. But post-Vietnam summit, there are going to be changes. I think the U.S. is going to be told that oil trade is going to be much more with gold payment, and look for a new vehicle. My bandied for, I've been talking about this for 4 years. It's the gold trade note. It's going to rival the U.S. Treasury bill as payment for oil. by China, etc., Asian countries.
Mm-hmm.
China already diverted, I think, about 3 or 4% of Saudi oil purchases. They're now Russian oil purchases. It's real simple why. They pay in RMB. Saudi is forced by the United States to require US dollar payments, namely US Treasury bill. Look for China to promote as a vehicle atop the Shanghai oil for gold futures contract, working together with the gold yuan contract, working together with the oil yuan contract. All three, combining with the Hong Kong exchanges. Look for more oil trade in RMB and gold terms. The United States is going to be told the gold trade note is going to happen whether you like it or not. It's going to compete with the Treasury bill. You can't stop progress. You can't declare war on 2/3 of the globe. So far, the United States has declared war on any country that promotes non-dollar oil sales. And that's the big violation by Iran. They continue to accept euro and gold. In other words, they continue to suffer the US SWIFT sanctions. And China and Russia just won't tolerate this anymore. They're working out big barter arrangements with Iran. They're working out big oil delivery contracts with Russian Rosneft. That's going to be in non-dollar. It's going to be ruble payments. And you have to admit that the volume of trade payments in RMB and ruble together are not very significant. It's still way under 10%. And the volume of bank reserves in global banking systems that are RMB based, like Chinese government bonds, it's way under 10%. So I think the United States is going to develop an attitude, Paul, simply put as scoffing and mocking the RMB universe, while the dollar universe continues with Western Europe, Britain, North America, and parts of South America, and remains dominant, but for a while. I think you're going to see a lot of growth. I mean, so far it's kind of insignificant.
Hey, Jim, do you remember the book 1984?
Sure.
Sure. Well, there we go. Oceania, East Asia, and Eurasia, right?
Yes, and I think Eurasia is going to start winning. And one of the elements that leads me to believe that is Great Britain itself. They joined the AIIB investment bank led by China. It's non-dollar. Britain, by means of the British exit, the Brexit, they put themselves in a vulnerable position, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
The British now are struggling. They're inviting China to create a large RMB hub center that has two functions. One is currency transactions in RMB with respect to the other Western currencies, all of them. Mm-hmm. The second function is RMB-based bond issuance, the panda bonds, etc. I mean, for example, Italy could issue an RMB-based bond to finance a portion of their debt, the Italian government debt, RMB-based bond, to attract Chinese money, which will no longer afterwards be concerned about currency shift because it's in the RMB. Where would that take place? London. Okay, that's what London is trying to court right now with respect to China. And I think they're going to succeed. And China's going to exact a price. I think they've already exacted a price.
Okay, but I got a question. London doing this sounds all good and everything, but can they survive a war with the EU and Germany? Or would that not happen?
That would not happen. They'd be allies. London's going to compete with Frankfurt. Frankfurt has already set up an RMB hub, and China has already blessed it. The big question to me is, which one is going to shine brighter, Frankfurt or London? London has a bigger base and a bigger head start, but Frankfurt has more trade with China. There's tremendous trade between Germany and China.
Right, and what I'm saying is, Britain, London going with the Brexit and then trying to be a financial hub for China sounds good, but can Germany and the EU do anything to smash them?
I think they're going to try to compete with them, not smash them. Mm-hmm. I think they're going to have coexistence without war and try to compete with London and attract more Chinese investment and currency trade with some very big carrots to offer China, namely technology. As I said, Germany has significant trade with China. Britain does not. Mm-hmm. So they're going to use that leverage to build up Frankfurt into something bigger than it already is as a Eurasian trade zone financial center. Now, notice all the One Belt, One Road projects. When I read about a new one, like to do a railroad in Thailand or a big bridge in Sri Lanka, I say, well, that's fine. Where's the financing coming from and who's going to broker it? Where will all the transactions take place and where will any new bonds be floated? I ask questions on the finance side. I don't think the Eurasian trade zone has sufficient financial backbones other than Hong Kong and Shanghai. They're going to try to expand that. But do you think Belgrade is going to be a financial hub? I don't. How about Astana in Kazakhstan? Maybe a little. I can't point to anything. You think Moscow? I think Moscow will be a bigger one for financing and just brokering the deals and funding the deals for the One Belt, One Road. Will Bangkok? I don't think so in Thailand. No, I think it's going to be Germany. I think Germany is going to emerge as a primary financial center for the Eurasian trade zone. And it's going to bother the shit out of Washington. But they're not going to get bombed. They're not going to have their leaders shot dead, the typical Langley stuff. There's going to be more peaceful coexistence. Because I think Russia and China are going to tell Washington, if you continue to kill in order to promote trade, then you're going to start seeing Washington figures knocked off. I'm not talking about a nuclear war. I'm talking about an uglier, bloodier trade war.
So where do you see Germany going then?
There's already a lot of movement just in the last 6 months. I mean, look at Schroeder, the former chancellor from 30 years ago, 28 years ago, 25 years ago. He's now the main spokesman to further along Nord Stream 2. My gosh, do you need a bigger statement than that? Germany as a government just delivered a flipped bird, if not a giant FU to Washington. We're proceeding with Nord Stream 2. Go to hell with your threats on sanctions for the construction and finance firms associated with this pipeline. It's an undersea pipeline. It's a gas pipeline. Okay, they delivered an FU to Washington. They're proceeding. Germany has also done something very clever in the last 3 years since the sanctions came on that the U.S. forced on Germany, and the little puppet named Angela Merkel approved and pushed through the parliament. What they've done is they've established, I don't know the number. I think it's 200 expanded subsidiaries of German firms, German named firms, and subsidiaries inside Russia. So if Metalgesellschaft, I know I didn't pronounce that right, Metalgesellschaft, if they have a subsidiary in Russia and it produces for Russian clients, that's not a violation of the Russian sanctions because it's a Russian firm that does the production. But it's a German corporation that has a subsidiary. Okay, the U.S. knucklehead, moron, idiotic trade war assholes still don't know how to write sanction legislation. Harken back to the Iranian sanctions, which said that their central bank cannot accept foreign payments for oil, but they left out all the major Iranian banks, so they accepted the gold for oil and just did the transfers internally with the central bank. The Obama administration was full of morons when they wrote trade sanction law also. So Germany found a loophole, and now Germany is thinking, just look at some of the statements of their economic minister. I don't even know if that's the right title, but Gabriel. He's like the vice chancellor and a former economic minister, and his main activity seems to be economic. Gabriel's made statements openly about what we're going to further trade with the Russians in the last couple of years have been unfortunate in the wrong direction. Okay, the signals and the writing on the wall all over the place in Germany are for more Russian trade, which violate, I think, the spirit of the sanctions. Now turn quickly to France, who's always tied at the hip with Germany. No sooner was Macron elected, fraud or no fraud in the voter, I don't give a crap right now. No sooner was Macron installed in the position of president that he had an invitation with the Russian delegation of leaders. And the message was clear. We want more Russian trade. Again, violating the spirit of the U.S.-led sanctions. So I think we're going to be seeing real soon a lot more open defiance, open statements, and openly photographed signing agreements between Germany and Russia. And I think it's good for trade, it's good for the economy, and it's good for reducing the tensions toward war. But meanwhile, the United States is still moving missiles all across the borders in NATO for Russia because Russia is such a threat. Yeah, Russian expansion is a threat, right?
Well, that's a joke. So do you think the EU will blow up, fall apart, break into two? What do you see?
Break into two or break into 20?
Well, that's the question. Two would be like a north and south. Some people talk about that for currencies and whatever. Hey, it's above my pay grade. I just, from the get-go, found the whole thing kind of impossible. But then again, I would find like a Northern Hemisphere union, the U.S. and Caribbean islands and all that in the same country to be totally ridiculous. But I'm not a technocrat. I'm not a bankster. They seem to think it's logical. What do you think? Where's the EU going?
I think they're going to retain their union, and they're going to have unspeakable pressure for more fractures. Bear in mind, Turkey was not a member of the European Union. They were a member of NATO. The whole NATO struggles might rip the EU apart. Trump made a meeting to Germany and told them that they're going to have to increase their budgets toward NATO armaments. And Germany told him, go play with yourself. Get lost. Germany turned around and said, well, we might need a different military alliance that would include Russia. Okay? So you have not just the trade elements moving to join Russia and Germany, you've got military alliances toward security. This is getting very weird, very complicated, and very overlapping. But Italy has been my focus of attention for well over a year for a simple reason, that they want to go to the lira again, and their banking system is destroyed, and their sovereign bond situation is a joke. It's in total ruins. It's a bankrupt sovereign bond. The Italians have come up with a very clever device internally of a sovereign currency type that cannot be rejected, but does not serve as a currency per se. It serves as a funding vehicle to finance their government debt, which would be subject later to discounts. And it's a very interesting concept. It's a sovereign currency type, but not a currency. So it's a sovereign funding vehicle, if you will. Okay, I think the Italian sovereign currency, call it a quasi-currency, is a precursor for a devalued lira. But this is a very complex situation for two reasons. It's the Maastricht and the actual euro itself and its makeup. Okay, let me just start with the Maastricht. In order to qualify as a member of the European Monetary Union, countries had to qualify in terms of financial percentage levels. The debt level, the sovereign debt level, the budget level, percentage of GDP, various different measures. And it was called generally the Maastricht Treaty. It was a financial treaty. Numerous violations took place, discovered 10 years later with the ever-present fraudulent Goldman Sachs, which did currency swaps in lieu of bond debt. So they got blurred over. It wasn't so much a sovereign debt as it was a currency contract on the side. Okay, so they violated with Goldman Sachs' help, and I think Spain did the same thing with Goldman Sachs' help. And I'm not sure, but I think Greece did the same thing with Goldman Sachs' help. Goldman Sachs should have been dissolved as a corporation for its violations. Instead, they're running the U.S. government financial ministry called the Department of Treasury. Okay, so you had Maastricht violations, and because of those violations, there were other foundational elements that were corrupted, namely rehypothecated Chinese gold. And the Voice filled me in on some of that. It resulted in 1,000 tons of London gold drained per month for over 2 years. They went directly to Beijing and Shanghai. Why? Because it was their gold to begin with, and the Westerners illegally, improperly, without permission, used it as the basis for the euro currency. Okay, so you've got Maastricht violations that have resulted in foundational cracks of the euro currency itself. Okay, that's issue number one. These are EU financial issues. The second one is the euro makeup. If the Italian lira were created and Italy broke away from euro usage, it would end the entire euro unless the euro had a new monetary union and conference, kind of like a constitutional congress, in order to create a new union and a new allotted percentage grouping that eliminated the Italian lira and had all the rest. But I think if they have that union, if they have that Congress, that meeting, other nations would step in and say, we don't want to be part of this anymore, like France. France has already divided up into two groups its sovereign debt, pre-Euro debt and post-Euro debt, and they're actually coming forth with movements. Even Macron is, tolerating this. Movements to have the old franc-based debt return as franc-based debt. And as soon as they do that, it's going to be devalued. And as soon as they do that, you're going to have more pressure for France to exit the Euro Union. This is very complex. I'm looking at Italy and I'm looking at France as the two breaking points. Now, you mentioned North and South. Okay, let's just touch on that a little bit. I got word way back in 2006 from The Voice, And he said, Jim, you need to understand the Eurobond has many shades. And I said, oh, I thought it was just one, but I've been hearing rumors about several. How is that working? And he said, well, they call it with an initial. And I don't know the initials. I mean, it could be W for Germany. I don't know the initials, okay? But there's a Greek Eurobond, there's an Italian Eurobond, a French Eurobond, and a German Eurobond, and they're starting now to differ in valuation. I said, oh my God, you're telling me that Eurobond is no longer a single element, but rather shades, and what is it, the black market is giving them different values? And he said, well, it's more like a premium upon purchase and a premium realized upon sale. And it's all going on under the table. I said, well, that sounds like a black market within the regular market. He said, well, in a sense, yeah. But he said it's going to break apart and it's going to kill Greece. And he told me that in 2008. And in 2010, we started to see it happen. Okay, my point is that Germany has a better bond, a better Euro bond. And it has been financing. Oh gosh, the voice told me, Jim, I'm from Central Europe, and I do some calculations once in a while, and I look at the German surpluses, and I look at the German investment in the pigs nations of Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. And he said it's $200 billion of financed sovereign debt per year, and it's been going on for 10 years. He said this around 2010 or so, 2011. He said, you're talking about $2 trillion of German savings that have financed the four pigs nations. And he said, on top of that, Germany owns 95% of the French government debt, 90 to 95% of it. And I said, well, I've long thought that France belongs in the pigs, because they look like them, they smell like them, they act like them, and their debt's just like them. And he said, yeah, well, true, except that Germany doesn't want France to fail. They feel like they're brothers. I said, oh, really? Yeah. Okay, so the point is that the Germans are financing the Southern European broken economies and sovereign debt. And they don't want to anymore. And it came to the fore with Greece, when the German banks were painted as the ugly players looking to seize assets. Well, if you've got $2 trillion in savings for the pigs, and 10% of that is sitting, like $20 billion, is sitting in the Greek debt, wouldn't you want something in return for your investment in Greek sovereign debt? But, well, we paint them as ugly, seizing and, favoring the austerity. And the austerity was not primarily a German bank idea. It was the Euro Central Bank and the European Union Commission, EU Commission. The austerity. Reduce your budget, cut things, harm your economy, and it's all good. Yeah, right. Suicide. I called austerity, Paul, suicide way back 4 or 5 years ago. Austerity plans are all suicidal. There's never an improvement in the economy. There's never an improvement in the sovereign bond. So why do they do it? You want to know why I think they did it?
Okay.
To kill the economy the rest of the way and further the European fascist state.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's not a mistake. They're just evil. No, it's a policy. And I don't think they ever thought that Greece could pay back. And why did they make Greece buy all those weapon systems from France and Germany or whatever that they don't need? I mean, it's a policy of basically bankrupting Greece. And it's political also.
Right. They
controlling Eastern Europe.
Mm-hmm. Sorry. They fostered the Greek-Turkish rivalry, battles, conflict, and then sold Greece. Greece has a bigger military budget than any other European country. And here's a lot of sense. Here's a startling fact. From 2003 onward, about 30% of the Greek debt is military.
Which is insane.
Who are they fighting?
I'm not sure. Germany?
Nobody.
No, just kidding. Nobody. I mean, this is ridiculous. And that's the whole point. That's why those of us who are skeptical of the whole EU see it as being torn apart over I guess you'd say internal feuds, banking, power plays in Eastern Europe. Just the idea to make it all one, it just all seems crazy to me. But
one of the easiest ways to make it all one is to wreck it all.
Yes, order out of chaos. And there we go back to that idea. That's blow it all up. And then whoever's left with any food or money will be king, right? You know, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And but I tell you what, that gets into another topic we wanted to cover, which is what might release gold from its suppression. A crisis, you know, what do you see? Where's gold going?
Well, that's a very general question, but what might release it from its shackles and suppression? I think the gold trade note and the Chinese gold for oil contract working together with Hong Kong and the Chinese gold yuan contract that delivers gold in a futures contract setting. You bring in the gold trade note for gold payment, and you make gold convertible from and to the yuan, Chinese RMB currency. And I think that is a giant lever to break a big crack open in the dollar, and the effect will be seen on gold. I'm told that there's a rollout. The voice told me there's a rollout of several different vehicles, and the Chinese Shanghai gold for oil contract is just the first of several. So what could break the gold suppression? The rollout of several gold-related vehicles under the Chinese aegis.
Okay.
And I don't have the entire playbook for how it's going to happen. But I expect the gold trade note is going to sit atop this gold oil contract because it's a natural. You buy oil, you use a gold trade note, you post gold as margin, and you use the Shanghai gold oil contract. So the underpinning of the gold trade note will be the Shanghai gold oil contract. So far, it's not used in that manner. But you ask what might break the gold suppression? I think gold usage in oil trade payment systems. It's going to be new. It's going to be powerful. I don't think we're going to, anytime real soon, see a Chinese gold-backed currency unless the Chinese get some kind of a leveraged agreement that Basel, the Vatican, and London supply the gold.
That'll be the day. That would be something.
Yeah, well, you know, London might be in talks toward that in order to win a bigger role as a Chinese RMB hub in London. You see how that angle works? And my question has always been, where's London going to get the gold? Because they've been just about drained. And the answer is Vatican. Now, the BIS from Basel has let it be known that they have supplied some gold to London in the last few years, but they're not going to supply anymore. That's a very nice, neat story that was not given proper publicity.
Well, what about another thing that would release gold, which is just a general worldwide economic crisis? You know, if you lose faith in pretty much all currencies, so to speak, what do you think? Do you see that as possible, or what do you think would happen?
No, I think we've been in an economic crisis since Lehman, and that has not produced what you're talking about.
Well, I would agree. But on the other hand, I think that people were, you know, when Lehman started, 2008, people were still kind of intimidated by the ability of the U.S. power elite to, what shall we say, deliver violence, deliver force. And
enforce their threats.
yeah, and I think that's fading. So for example, I don't think the U.S. is going to attack Iran or North Korea. I don't think it's going to work. I might be wrong, but I think Russia and China can say, "Hey, don't mess with North Korea." And in the case of Iran, I don't think we can achieve enough to make it worth our while, because wars are political and attacks are political. You know what I mean? There's some reason you do it. And again, I might be wrong in this, but I think the U.S. is tremendously weaker than, let's say, 10 years ago.
Well, this newfound courage and enthusiasm to oppose New York and Washington, if not the Rothschild Central Bank group, this new enthusiasm and courage, I think, is going to be manifested in joining the Eurasian Trade Zone. So it is channeled in the areas and the organizations that I'm watching that are growing. The entire One Belt, One Road is within the Eurasian Trade Zone. The entire cross-border interbank payment system. It's not the Chinese interbank payment. It's cross-border. The CIPS rival to SWIFT, it's all China. And the fees are lower, much lower. So they're not going to have much trouble getting new players on board that. The Asian... Go ahead.
Jim, I just happened to look at a Japanese paper, their equivalent of the Wall Street Journal, the Nihon Keizai Shimbun. And they had a list of the changes in the last 10 years regarding China and their trade with Southeast Asia. So you're talking about going from, for example, 18% to 28%, right? For pretty much every country there. And when you're talking about, let's say, vehicle production, well, they're surpassing the U.S., of course. You know what I mean? The numbers are very significant. And if you were anybody of any sense sitting in a place like Thailand or Indonesia or whatever, you're going to say, look, the obvious future is we're going to be doing a tremendous amount of business with China. And that's our future. So that's the way I think they're looking at it. And whether that will, so I think it's largely going to be up to China in terms of Asia, how they want to structure all these things, because I think they have such a dominant position now. But we shall see.
In support of your point, there are numerous Japanese companies that have done outsourcing to make, say, Sony equipment, or to make, I don't know what their leading cell phone is. I honestly don't in Japan. But
well, I hate to tell you, but South Korea's got that market. Samsung.
Yeah, could be. But home electronics and a lot of different things that are made in Japan. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some Toyota component parts made in China. There are numerous little subsidiaries and plants in China operating under the Japanese corporate banner. Okay, it's already happening. Now you couple that with what I pointed out before, Japan working with Russia for natural gas shipments and LNG shipments and gas pipelines from the Sakhalin Sea area. The messages are very clear. I think the United States is going to lose Japan to the Eurasian Trade Zone.
I think the U.S. is going to leave Asia, but I'm just not sure because there's the issue of Europe and the Middle East, and I'm not sure what area they would want to leave first based on negotiations.
The United States is going to leave the Middle East also.
I know. I think that's a given, actually, at this point. That's part of the importance of Turkey. And
I'm waiting
Russia.
for them to leave Germany. We've left Turkey. We're leaving the Middle East, and I think we're going to leave Asia. But South Korea is a totally different story.
Jim, you're starting to sound like a founding father or something. Adams and.
No, I'm angry.
Don't go out
angry
looking for
that our country has been usurped.
I think that at some point possessing a letter from a founding father might be considered terrorism, because the ideas would be so radical. Hey, the last thing
let me just say something quickly here. I've told some family and other friends that they're so backwards in their political thinking that if they were to have for dinner Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin, they would hate them. And they say, what? And I say, you read the New York Times. It's a fascist rag.
That's true.
Everything in the New York Times goes completely contrary to what Thomas Jefferson preached.
But Jim, it's really the victory of brainwashing. You can just brainwash anybody, it seems, anything, if you say it enough. I mean, the big lie, it works, endlessly say it. And there you go. And you can convince people that black is white, white is black. It's really amazing to watch. But, that's
it's hard to convince people who deal with the scientific sequence of thought process. Like when 9/11 happened, I go, oh my gosh, that's horrible. 10 kids. And I thought, 10 kids? They had trouble flying a Cessna. Are you kidding me? I've seen what the cockpit looks like on a big Boeing. I stick my head in there and take a look. And then I started, just looking at all the evidence and the thermite. And no, I don't buy this story anymore. And then I started seeing what they do with guys like Charlie Sheen, who said this was demolition. Anyone with a half a brain can see that. Okay, I'm different from many. My brother does not evaluate new evidence and say, well, let's test that. Let's take a look at my premise and see if it's consistent with new data. He doesn't do that. A lot of Americans don't do that.
Well, I think people have drunk the Kool-Aid.
No, they've given up on a thought process, Paul. It's worse than that.
Yeah,
they don't give too much credit to brainwashing. I give credit to bad educational system. And you call that brainwashing if you want. I don't. I know too many artsy-fartsy literary type people who do not think like a scientist. I say to them, are you aware that thermite was all through the ruins of the World Trade Center? And they go, well, I know, but I just see on the news and it's just so prevalent. What happened, Jim? I say, 2,000 degrees is what you need in a jet fuel. That's what you get in a jet fuel, burning fire. That's not enough to melt structural steel. Do you care about stuff like that? And they go, I don't know. I really never studied chemistry.
Well,
no,
Jim,
it's
there's
not
the other
brainwashing. It's ignorance and educational fault lines. They don't look at new evidence, and they do something even stupider. They say, well, you read that on the internet, right? And I say, yeah, the internet is also responsible for airline schedules. It's responsible for supply chain. It's responsible for customer service and product information. Where the hell have you been the last 15 years?
Well, Jim, my general take, though, is having worked with the scientific stuff for a long time and working with people who are basically from MIT or the Indian Institutes or places like that, I actually think they're easier to brainwash than, say, a truck driver, because the truck driver has to have common sense. And when you factor in success makes you arrogant. And when you have a good job, good title, lots of money, stock options, all that kind of stuff, you think you're better than everybody, and you become disdainful of these things and ideas that are against the system.
Well,
right?
That may be. You also have to factor in the scientific research grants. So anyone who's
there's
wants
corruption.
that grant money, they've got to twist their research to satisfy the requirements of the grant. We got something like half of the research done in the United States is tainted.
Well, again, you're maybe of my age, and I remember when the front page of things like Newsweek talked about the threat of the coming ice age. Global cooling might kill us all. And here we are. And Now it's the opposite. I mean, now we need to be afraid and pay a license to the derivatives scamsters to have CO2. It's just a fraud. But anyway, I tell you what, I wanted to move on if I could, so we can get it covered, because I think a last question is important, which is this whole expansion of the blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies and all these tokens and everything. And there are all these fights going on. And I just listened to Doug Casey talk about his concern that basically there'll be a Fed coin, so to speak, not a Bitcoin, a Fed coin in the cashless society. But anyway, I thought I'd ask you a few questions. One of which is, do you think that Wall Street is basically taking over Bitcoin, or at least trying?
No, I don't think they know how.
Okay.
And also the two main, how should you call it, priorities, tenets, reason for being.
Okay.
The two major priorities of Wall Street are centralized power and no transparency. Both of them violate every principle of Bitcoin and blockchain. So I don't expect Wall Street to get very far unless they turn honest, and I don't think they're going to turn honest.
That would not be in my list of fears.
Okay, so if they don't turn honest, they're going to insist on opacity, the lack of transparency, and it's just not going to work. They could come out with their own coins and tokens, and they could even have a thematic token. But as soon as it starts to operate, you're going to start to see the centralization to hide the corruption and the lack of transparency, and I think they'll die on the vine. So the Wall Street priorities and history, I think, will doom almost everything they do in the crypto and blockchain space. And that's a rather sweeping statement to make, but I don't think you're going to find them ever decentralizing, and I don't think you're ever going to find them adopting transparency. So how can they survive in the crypto space given those two violations?
By moving things off the blockchain and moving them to a second layer, second tier. And various other technologies. I mean, I think they're working on them right now. But whether
that's
it will
fine,
succeed,
but if they end up being centralized, they're not going to be adopted unless they're adopted by law and force.
Or they're or they're adopted by the core programmers who are mostly employed by Wall Street companies, or in particular Blockstream, which is through AXA, and the people on the board of that are people like Summers and Blythe Master and so on. So I think there's already been a tremendous move to put these kinds of people in the technology that's going to be needed to make Bitcoin work going forward.
Well, that could be, and there might be some progress, but unless they enforce it with law and obligation for usage, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. There's a lot of movement, a lot of development in Switzerland. It's the main development center for cryptos and blockchain. I don't think they're going to say, oh, well, let's just move all of our work under Wall Street and take orders from them. There's too much independence going on. Independence is the name of the game with crypto, and conformity is the name of the game in Wall Street, and they clash in that too. Everything about the culture and priorities of crypto violate Wall Street.
Well, I think that used to be the case because it was a very radical libertarian kind of thing, but I think it's become much more money and asset based in the last few years. And we shall see. But I agree with you in general that that's the case, but I just think that the banksters want a cashless society. And
they're not going to get it. I mean, You know,
Isn't like
I
Sweden,
would
aren't
like
some countries in
100%
Europe
sexual
already cashless?
performance, Paul.
I'm with you. My spirit is with you.
I
I'm
would
just
like a
saying there are
perfect
countries in
diet.
Europe now that
I
are
would like
based.
never to be sick.
Okay.
I would like 100% bedroom performance. I would
Good.
like to avoid chocolates. I would like all imbeciles to be out of government. The bankers
Now
want
that's-
a cashless society.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great. What's their next desire? Because I don't give a shit what their desires are.
Well, they can control the banking system and control the politicians and so on. Look, I'm totally with you. I'm
Let them
against
try.
I think they
Anyone
are.
who thinks cashless society is going to be the name of the game and the rule of the day, I think is an imbecile. Imbecile.
I'm told it's almost the case now in, let's say, Sweden.
Okay, let me just read off.
Mm-hmm.
I have a note on my wall because this topic comes up once in a while and annoys the heck out of me.
Okay, go for it.
How are politicians going to be bribed in the future in a cashless society? Will they just all have secret Cayman accounts or a secret Vatican account like Obama? Or will they never be paid in cash? I don't think so. How are you going to get the purchase of illicit drugs? You going to buy cocaine on Bitcoin? Fedcoin? Anyone who thinks that's an imbecile. How are you going to do gambling? How are they going to fix national football games with Vegas influence? Will that be with Bitcoin? No, it's going to be cash. How do you fence? Did I just lose you?
No, I'm listening.
Okay, my light went off and I thought electricity went out here. Okay, how are you going to fence stolen goods? You steal a truckload of cigarettes out of North Carolina. Are you going to fence it using crypto and Bitcoin? Is there going to be an illicit Bitcoin type for criminal usage?
Of course.
This is the kind of imbecility that I don't tolerate. How are you going to buy a nice hooker? You're going to say, hey, honey, I got some Bitcoin for you. No, she's going to say, I want cash, you idiot. How are you going to conduct the entire black market? How are you going to do secondary currency trade that's not official on the rate for Forex? Well, we got some Bitcoin to handle the Venezuelan second-tier currency for the Bolivar. What a moronic thought. Do you have any more questions about a cashless society, Paul?
Well, I will just point out that a lot of Bitcoin supporters, and including early supporters who are kind of libertarian-oriented, they would argue that that was indeed a great part of cryptos, is that they would be and are used in places like Venezuela or Vegas or the drug market, and that some of the cryptos have phenomenal privacy, certainly, a million times what the dollar does these days if it's electronic. So I don't know what's going to happen. I
think you're correct there. I think you're correct. You don't know what's going to happen. Regarding cash society, you don't know what's going to happen. I agree with you that. There would have to be an entire class of cryptocurrencies that governments tolerate for black market and criminal enterprise. And that's precisely what they're targeting. You're not going to get cashless society for the same reason you're not going to get illegal enterprises using crypto for transfers that can't be taxed or discovered or used in court. The entire concept of cashless society is one of the stupidest I've heard in my entire adult life.
Well, young people today in the U.S. and certainly in let's say Northern Europe, a lot of them don't even seem to know what cash is. I mean, dealing with Northern Europeans or Germans or whatever, I feel like a lot of these people hardly even under the age of 30, they don't even know what cash is. They pay with electronic things for $1 or $2 or whatever. So
There are pockets, I agree, and like Norway and Sweden are pockets, but try that in Italy. Try that in Italy, okay?
No, because I agree with you. The cultural thing. Italy is a place that on principle everyone disobeys government. And I like that. But I'm just saying we shall see. I think it's a fight. I don't know I have no idea what's going to happen. I was just pointing out Doug Casey is not very optimistic. He thinks that
about
if
what?
about the ability of using cash. I mean, they are going to make it so, let's say there aren't any $100 bills, then you're down to 20s, and you know what I mean. And then
was Doug Casey drunk when he said that?
I don't think so. I think he's just concerned, and I think a lot of us are. But
well, when he's speaking before a crowd, he's usually drunk, so I don't really know.
Well, it was just an interview, but the point is, we understand that the banksters are after us, and they're going to try to get their dirty little claws on everything one way or another, and then we're going to be in a constant fight against them. And that's just
Doug Casey is involved in something called the Gold Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, and I think he is a total lunatic in that project. Also.
Okay. Well, the issues are separate from him. Lots of people are concerned about the movement to a cashless society, which you think isn't going to happen. So that's it.
If there's a Fed coin, Paul, I'd like to know what it is. Mm-hmm. I'd like to know whether it's got a centralized function that the Wall Street banks would control. I'd like to know if it's transparent. And I'd like to know if crime could be interwoven with its blockchain.
Well,
because crime is interwoven with every single Wall Street function and every single Federal Reserve function. So if they do a Fed coin, where is it not part of a criminal structure?
Well, clearly that's the thing. They would
turn a new leaf on life and become honest and transparent. No. I don't buy it for a minute.
No, they'd have something off-chain. They would have something that's transparent in a sense, but we can't see it. Just like how can all this criminal activity like Bernie Madoff be done through brokers and banks or whatever? They had to have known it was fraudulent. And the answer is they did know it was fraudulent. They just were part of the club. So in any case, I wasn't trying to...
That's fine. We disagree on cashless. I think it's going nowhere. It might have pockets of acceptance, but I would love to take a closer look at Sweden and Norway, where they have a good deal of cashless operation. I would love to see, how do they pay for their illicit drugs? How do they pay for their prostitutes? How do they pay for their fenced product that's stolen? How do they pay their bribes for the governor?
Good question.
When you learn those answers, get back to me, because you're the one who brought up Northern Europe advocating and conforming with the cashless society. I'd like to know how they pay for those things.
Well, I tell you what, but I am old enough, Jim, to remember that it used to be easy to carry around lots of cash, because I basically did in the United States. Okay, or keep it at home, keep it in the glove box, whatever, it didn't matter. I don't think it's that comfortable anymore. Even just crossing borders,
that doesn't mean we're moving to cashless society. It means we're living in a fascist, restrictive environment for movement of money. I mean, yeah, you got $10,000 limit for crossing a border on an airliner or a bus. Okay, does that mean we're moving to cashless? No, it means that large amounts of cash can't move.
Well, sure, but for those of us who move or need to do whatever, it means that we don't have the freedom we used to, and so we're basically forced into the banking system of wiring stuff.
Well, you're also forced into crypto for doing whatever transfers you can.
And that's good news.
Crypto is one of the major enemies of cashless society.
Well, now that's the argument, and that's a very valid point. And in the early days of Bitcoin, that was the dominant group, was a libertarian side to it, and it's very interesting. And it's very interesting how it's become now kind of a respectable thing. Forbes praising Bitcoin and that kind of thing.
Well, that bothers me when Forbes praises Bitcoin, because it tells me that there's going to be an ugly, illicit element within Wall Street that tries to capture a corner of the Bitcoin market.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, I tell you what, Jim, we've had you for quite a while, and we really do appreciate your time. But before we close, could you mention your letter and website and all that?
Sure. The website is www.goldenjackass.com. And the coming month, this month now for the report, is month number 164. I remember when I met Kurt Rickenbacker in Cannes, France, Fred Fribier. Yeah, he passed away in 2008, but I met him in August of 2003. We had a week long, and I said to him, "My gosh, Kurt, you've had 230 months?" And he said, "Yes, it's been a long ride, Jim." Anyway, it's goldenjackass.com. There's a free area on the main web page. It's got interviews like this. It's got public articles. I just had one on Saudi Arabia where I claim it's falling apart. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. I'm going to do probably another article about, is Saudi Arabia holding it together? But we'll see with the Aramco IPO, which I think is going to be very troubled. So there's the Golden Jackass website, and there's a hat trick letter. It started in May of 2004, and it really blossomed after the Lehman and subprime explosion, because I led up to that with forecasts of the blow up. So the reward was the newsletter grew by 50% after that. There are two reports that are monthly. One is the Global Money War Report. That's about defense of the king dollar in general. It has many sides. The second report is the Golden Currency Report. That gets down to the nitty-gritty level, like coin demand, metal demand deficits for gold and silver. I used to cover a lot more about the COMEX, but now that's such a fraudulent center. I largely ignore the COMEX. I mean, it's all paper, charade, and corruption. But in the second report, the Golden Currency Report, that's where I include the development and organization of the Eurasian trade zone and the fall of the petrodollar. The petrodollar and oil is really part of the currency story, so that's where you find it. But it's a labor of love, Paul, and I really enjoy it. Sometimes it drains me. Sometimes I get a little bit discouraged by constant suppression of gold, but we will prevail. And I actually think that the cryptocurrencies are going to be an important part of the successful release of gold and silver. It's not just going to be the gold trade note with China buying oil. It's going to be the cryptos being backed by gold and silver, which bring about new challenges. And we didn't get into all that, but that's okay. So I invite people to go to goldenjackass.com, bounce around, and sign up for the newsletter. I love mentioning my two favorite compliments. One would say and I've gotten dozens of each type. I used to be a client of yours for a few years, but since 2013, I've been away, and I got back last year, and I wish I'd never left. Okay, because I missed the steady flow of great information, great analysis, tying things together with your nice forecasts that turn out 80 to 90% of the time to be true. The other compliment was, and I didn't get this much until the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, because I didn't do a lot of radio shows, but it went like this. It's a common compliment. I was not a subscriber of yours because I figured I'd just listen to your frequent interviews on the internet, and they were rich, they were rosy, they were entertaining, and I I look forward to the next one. But I finally decided to sign up for your newsletter several months ago, and I don't know why I didn't do it sooner. It's so interesting. It reads like a spy novel. You tie things together very well and cover a lot of things that you don't do on your radio shows. All right, so I like that, Paul. I really like that. It keeps me going. And a lot of people are in trouble right now. The economy is in terrible shape. I think, honestly, we have our 10th consecutive year in the United States of a recession that's worse than minus 2%. It takes a toll. The jobless rate is like 23%. They just look at the percentage of people collecting unemployment from states. That's not the jobless rate. I know people who are jobless and were not counted because they ran out of their unemployment benefit. A friend of mine is facing living in a truck right now. His little pickup truck.
Oh, wait a minute, Jim. You're not homeless if you're living in a truck. They're redefining living, right? And you know what I mean? It's like the, hamburgers, you just substitute, right? You substitute, worms for hamburger and you're still getting protein.
Dog food.
Dog food. Okay, you're substituting dog food. And pretty soon there'll be restaurants that'll be like dog food burgers and stuff. Actually, I think they already have them, but they call them hamburgers. But
my definition of a home is that it has a toilet, it has a kitchen, and it has a roof.
Yeah, but you're an old fart, and you remember
pre-feudal
America, right? We're returning to feudalism, man. What do you mean?
I know.
Get outhouses.
I'm not really a player within Reich economics.
Right.
The Reich
economics. With that happy note, let's call it a day. So thanks so very much for coming. It's a wrap.
It was a pleasure, Paul. We touched on a lot of very meaty things. Thanks for having me on.
Take care. Bye.
All right, bye.